This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. You can join the conversation on our website, WNPR.org/The Wheelhouse. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. Colin McEnroe is once again off this week, still recuperating. Feel better, Colin. We'll have you back in your chair soon. But instead, today we've got Bilal Sakou. He's Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Hartford. Always good to see you, Bilal. Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
Also with us is Danny Haar. He's editor and columnist at Hearst, Connecticut Media. Hello there, Danny.
Good morning. Great to be here.
And making her Wheelhouse debut, Emily Munson. She's state capitol reporter for Hearst, Connecticut Media. Hello there.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming in. And there's a lot to cover, as I said, but why don't we start with some news from yesterday? We're going to get to Governor Lamont's budget proposal, some of the back and forth, both Republicans and Democrats unhappy with some of the things he's proposing. But this is maybe already come home a little bit to roost. There was a series of special elections yesterday, Danny, 5 of them, as a matter of fact, all because Governor Lamont has installed various Democrats in different parts of his new government. That meant that, as we've already talked about, some people who just won elections maybe are running different elections. It's certainly caused some consternation amongst people who thought that they voted for someone who then isn't going to be serving out that term. But of those 5 special elections, turns out the Democrats only won 3 of them. What happened there?
Good heavens, the tradition of a winning new administration appointing people from the legislature to jobs? I'm shocked.
I know. Well, look, it is something that always happens, and it is something that we can always complain about a little bit. But maybe Democrats have a little bit more to complain about this time because, as it turns out, we don't actually have a clean sweep of Democrats, Emily. I don't know. Should I be surprised at this?
Well, some folks are saying that this is a reaction to Lamont's flip-flop on tolls and his budget proposal, which contains many expansions of the sales tax that people are pretty unhappy with. I think it's hard to read too much into these results because it's only 5 races and there was extremely low turnout. So it's hard to say that it's a widespread referendum on the governor.
Maybe not a widespread referendum, but it did say something very early on, didn't it?
I think there are 2 different things going on. In the Senate race in New Britain and Berlin, I think you can say that the governors, I hesitate to say flip-flop, let's say pivot to comprehensive tolls was a very big issue in that election. And I think it's fair to say, J.R. Romano, the Republican chairman, is saying, and I think it's fair to say that was a significant issue. Turnout was very, very low in New Britain. Bizzarro did lose New Britain, but won Berlin by a whole lot, which is not surprising. And so we see a shift from a city to a town, an adjacent town, which is part of a longer-term trend. And I do think that was an issue there. In the East Haven House race, that was probably more a personality-driven. And remember, that race, that district has been Democrat for a long time, but it really has elected a Democrat who, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was Mike Lawler's district. I believe that is the case. And it's elected, and James Albus as well, it has elected someone who's generally more liberal than the district. And so this is the coming home to roost. This is a guy who's the town attorney who grew up in town, who knows everybody.
And just so that people who are just tuning in aren't thinking that Danny Haar is talking about a Superman comic strip, we're actually talking about Republican Gennaro Bizzarro of New Britain, who won the 6th Senate district, beating Rick Lopes. In the other race, Joseph Zullo of East Haven won in the 99th House district. So, yeah, extraordinarily low turnout, right. Bilal, and that's what always happens with these special elections, which is one of the reasons why I think from a good government standpoint, we kind of worry about whether or not this is a really good idea to, in the middle of the wintertime, force voters who have just voted for someone to come back and vote once again. It is, however, interesting to see a tiny little bit of a referendum on maybe some issues that are already plaguing the new administration.
Yeah, I think it's still early to really determine what exactly was on voters' minds without actually asking them that. But I think this problem of low voter turnout, I think really hurt the Democrats in New Britain, for example. During a regular election, you probably would have seen a substantially much higher turnout that would have favored the Democrat and probably helped the Democrat win in that particular race. But I think you're right. It really brings home, just this larger issue of when we have special elections and when we do our, elections for the actual, to pick the nominees for parties. We're doing them at a time where turnout is low. But at the same time, we've got to really re-energize people about what is really our most important civic duty, which is to vote and to get out there and to do that regardless of what the weather is like and regardless of what time of the year it's occurring.
Well, this was the argument against having a revote in the, 140th, 120th in Stratford where they botched the election. And logic says have a revote because they blew the election. We don't know who would have won. It's obvious. But the problem is just what happened yesterday, that when you have a special election, especially off-season, middle of the winter, few people show up, and you've already had a big election with 10,000 voters in a House district in that case. And this is exactly what they're talking about when they say let's not have an election.
Emily, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think that's the exact question that House leadership is wrestling right now. They have been meeting for a couple weeks trying to come to a decision about whether or not they're going to put this to a vote on the full House floor. And hopefully we'll get an update on that soon. But with a split recommendation from the Committee on Contested Elections, where basically 2 Democrats said, we don't want to disenfranchise the 10,000 voters who cast ballots in November, and the 2 Republicans saying, hey, we know at least 75 people got the wrong ballots. That balance is really tricky, and I know there's been a lot of negotiation between the top Republicans and Democrats in the House over this issue.
Yeah, maybe before we close the loop on this, Bilal, it does point out that getting elections right is always important. Getting elections right when you're talking about very small numbers of voters is super, super important. And that's what's happening in this contested election from November. It's what's happening in these special elections that are happening just this week, that our inability sometimes to be able to conduct elections sort of fairly, properly, enfranchise everyone, that's got to be, I would think, at the top of the list of things Connecticut really has to solve moving forward.
Right. And it's not just Connecticut. This is a problem across the country
Absolutely.
in terms of turnout. And again, special elections can be really difficult. Primaries, in August are really difficult. At the end of the day, we've got to invest a lot more energy in this state and across the country, and the kind of civic education that we need in the country, and really ways to promote voter turnout in this country.
Well, the GOP has certainly said already if they won 2 of these special elections yesterday, in part it was due to Governor Lamont, maybe some Democrats talking about tolls a little too much. Governor Lamont has said now that he's giving state lawmakers 2 options, either the truck-only highway tolls he talked about during his campaign and tolling all vehicles. Lamont has said repeatedly, we need more revenue. We need to be able to find a way to pay for infrastructure improvements. Here he is on Monday at the I-84 Route 8 interchange in Waterbury, infamously known as the Mixmaster.
A lot of our infrastructure in the state of Connecticut is getting a little long in the tooth. And now is the time for us to put together a strategic plan to make sure that we can rebuild the Mixmaster, A, from a point of view of public safety, B, decongesting what we got to do. And in terms of economic development, there's nothing more important than getting this state moving again.
All right, Emily, you spent all day down there at the Capitol. What are the hurdles that Lamont has to get over to getting some sort of tolling system put in place in order to pay for the highway improvements like at the Mixmaster and all over the state?
Well, I think there's pretty broad Democratic agreement that some sort of tolling plan needs to be put in place. But the debate is going to be over exactly how to implement that. Where should they put the gantries and that sort of thing? And which roads, where, and how much should Connecticut residents be told? I think that's a major concern, is how will this affect the middle and lower class, people who might commute frequently but not be able to afford to pay $1 every time that they, cross a gantry on I-84.
And this is why one of the things Danny Lamont is talking about is making sure the Connecticut residents get a break on whatever tolls they pay. That is one of a couple legal questions that might come up here. If you give Connecticut residents too much of a break, then out-of-state residents, certainly truckers, might have a case in court. It's already pretty clear that the idea to just toll trucks, something that Rhode Island has tried, is probably going to have legal barriers in front of it. I mean, how exactly does he thread this needle?
He threads the needle by you really have to lower other transportation-related taxes and fees, because the issue here is, as Emily said, it's really no longer politics. I think they have the votes to do something, but the something that they're going to do is going to ram down the throats of Republicans exactly what the Republicans have been warning about. And so the bigger picture politically and economically is, what are you going to do in return for that to not sort of screw up the state? We get that we need money for the highway. So you raise $800 million, $350 million of it comes from out of state. Of that $350 million, let's call that the dividend, right? You've got to give half of that back to the residents immediately in either a cut gas tax, which is not a good thing. You like high gas taxes are good for lots of reasons, but you want to, and I know you're going to get a call about that, or lower fees for motor vehicles. You have to give back half the dividend, because that gives a sense that you're not just ramming this down people's throats who warned against it originally.
Bilal?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good conversation starter that the governor has put out there. It's been obviously debated for a number of years, but to me, I mean, this has to fall within a larger sort of thinking about taxes in Connecticut and the way we do this. I mean, you know, Emily's point about the potential regressivity of this particular tax on middle class and lower class people using our highways, to me, and then that sort of coupled with what the governor is proposing with regard to the sales taxes and other things, to me, you know, he's planting the seeds of a real revolt among voters in the state against the Democratic Party and against his governorship. And so I think what really needs to occur is a much larger rethink of Connecticut's tax system and how we go about doing this, and making sure that it's a fair tax system, which means putting back on the table some things that the governor and other leaders have put off the table in terms of taxes on the wealthy. And I know we're going to get to that a little bit later around some of those issues, but I think that larger look is what needs to be done in this state.
Well, and just a quick thought on that idea, Emily, of a backlash against the entire Democratic Party, not just against a brand new governor. We saw State Representative Jason Rojas, a Democrat from East Hartford, tweeting, here's an idea. Every town that passes anti-toll resolution gets their town aid, road, or other state aid for infrastructure eliminated. Cool. I essentially making the point that, you know, the towns that want to oppose this tolling plan maybe shouldn't get so much stuff from the state. I can't imagine that makes any friends.
I don't think it does. And he tried to backtrack, you know, saying that, listen, the state really needs revenue. We need to find a way to come up with this money, and if we can't raise taxes in some manner, the state is just not going to be able to provide the same level of aid to towns. However, I don't think this manner of announcing it is really a great political strategy. No offense, Jason.
Probably not a terribly great political strategy. Well, let's broaden it out, Danny, and just talk about the tax increases that we're talking about on the table already. We'll call tolls taxes in some way because they're going to tax the usage of our roads. That's there. What else are we seeing in the Lamont tax plan to try to solve our big budget deficit?
$500 million in the expansion of the state sales tax, not increasing the rate from 6.35%, but expanding it. The major expansion in the proposal is in professional services. When you add up real estate services, which I think is not commissions, but other related services like appraisals and inspections, real estate services, engineering services, law, legal services, and accounting. Those four things alone account for well more than half of the $500 million. And the rest of it is haircuts and stuff like that. And everybody is lining up to say, not don't tax us because we are important economically, but don't tax us because of some big important reason. And let me start with the newspapers. The Hartford Courant had an editorial saying that taxing newspapers, and I couldn't agree more, is anti-democratic, right? So everybody is taking their interests. For example, the CPAs issued a statement on the day of the proposal saying that it's unfair to say to people, we want you to do a good job filling out your tax forms, and then we're going to tax you for that. That's unfair. The lawyers, the Bar Association, they're going to win because the legislature is all lawyers, is saying that this removes access to legal services from the poor. So everybody has a moral argument. I can't wait to hear the barbers and what their moral argument is.
I don't need a barber. So.
I know, exactly. Bilal's like, I'm cool.
Not an issue for me there. This is, again, one of those examples, and I think the media can be really particularly helpful in this and really helping us to understand just how unusual perhaps Connecticut is with regard to some of its exemptions. compared to other states, and what things we would like to add that the governor is proposing to add that are so different from what other states do as well, to give us a sort of broader perspective on it. One that I think many people simply don't have. Right now, we've got sort of this avalanche of ideas about ways to generate revenue that, as Dan has pointed out, it has generated some resistance from all kinds of quarters who have been arguing for years that our exemption is the most important exemption, and if you get rid of this exemption, we'll never be able to do business, and everybody will live in a disastrous state. I'll make my pitch for
the newspapers is real.
That I agree, real. And I'll make my pitch for the idea of not taxing textbooks for students who work at who go to a university. As someone who works at a university, struggles to just get the students to purchase the textbook and actually read it. And exactly, that's my point. And I think the idea of taxing that. So I think there's some things in there that will, over the legislative process, will get whittled out. But I think there are some things that probably need to be done in the state.
One of the interesting things about the taxes proposed in the state budget was what was not on the list, which would be what was not included in the budget was taxing legalized marijuana and also tax revenue that could be raised from sports betting. Those two elements were not included in the budget. However, I was having conversations with lawmakers yesterday who were saying, I really feel an urgency to act on sports betting and marijuana, even if I really don't support those issues, because the tax proposals in Governor Lamont's budget were so unappealing to me that I want to find an alternative way of raising revenue.
Well, and I think that it seems pretty clear that some sort of marijuana legalization, if not this year, is coming down the pike in Connecticut. And so making room for that makes sense. Maybe later on in the hour we're going to talk more about casinos, but that sports betting piece of it, Emily, is really, really important. Yeah, maybe we could raise more revenue off of sports betting, but there's this entire gigantic problem having to do with the compact with the tribes, whether or not they're going to get a piece of this. And I think that there's an awful lot of questions that maybe he doesn't want to get into right now around that.
That's definitely true. I spent about 9 hours yesterday in a public safety committee meeting where these questions were being debated back and forth all day. Woo-hoo. Who should have a cut of participating in sports betting? And there were representatives from DraftKings there. There were representatives from the MLB and NBA Players Association. There was the Connecticut Lottery. There were the tribes. Everybody wants to participate in this. And frankly, I think lawmakers are really overwhelmed with how to craft a proposal that would be fair and would bring in good revenue to the state.
The idea, as I heard from Rodney Butler with the tribes, that sports betting is a casino game, and so therefore it should fall under the compact. I think I'll just say, having taken part in basketball pools since I was about 6 years old, I would say it's probably not just a casino game. But anyway, this is such a fraught issue, Dan, and it seems as though states are lining up to figure out how they can capitalize on all the money that's out there. And we may, because we've got this Indian tribe compact, we just may be bickering it to death while everyone else gets the revenue.
Yeah, this is a classic race to the bottom because everybody knows that taken to an extreme, these various forms of taxing habit, let's say, whether it's sugar drinks, which, by the way, is $163 million, going back to what the tax increases are for sugar drinks. I don't want to lose that thought. But whether it's gambling or marijuana or tobacco, sort of the idea of taxing habits is unpalatable to a point. And so we're getting further and further down that road because other states are doing it and because we don't have the ability to tax in the normal route.
But I'm glad that you raised the sugary drinks, just because that's exactly the sort of thing. If you're talking about $163 million, it has the type of impact of being able to paint with a broad brush an entire Democratic Party, a brand new governor, as overreaching, taxing people's habits, not letting me have my big gulp, but not really raising the money necessary to do anything.
Well, that's right. And the tax, the sugar tax, the sweetened drink tax, that's 1.5 cents per ounce. And let's say they're able to pass 1 cent per ounce, which some jurisdictions are doing. I think Philadelphia is moving backwards on the 1.5 cents. But let's say 1 cent an ounce. Let's say it raises $100 million, right? That's arguably the most regressive thing you can do. right? What it is, it's a voluntary tax on the poor. It's similar to the lottery, right? Who plays the lottery? Well, the poor. Right? So it's a voluntary tax on the poor. And so that raises all kinds of moral implications, not just with the regressive tax, but with the morality of that tax. And I think we're coming to the point where we need the money, and we're saying because it's voluntary, we're going to do that. I just do want to quickly say that the sales tax that we talked about before, normally you think of a sales tax as being more regressive, hurting the poor more. Because of the way this sales tax increase is structured, professional services, that's less regressive than an increase in some other taxes.
Since we're talking about regressive taxes, Bilal, I just want to ask you, the national conversation as we begin to add new Democratic candidates for the 2020 presidential election, everyone, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, everyone's sort of talking about what we're going to do to get more from the richest 1.01% of Americans that own so much of the wealth. What about the conversation at the state level? Because there's still an awful lot of progressives in this state who say, no sugary tax. Don't worry about taxing the lottery. Let's talk more about figuring out how we can tax the really, really rich people who live in the state.
Right. And let me just, say that Dan is absolutely correct in what he just said about this in terms of just how regressive this is. But to me, it also reflects a kind of gutlessness on the part of lawmakers in this state to really sort of take on people who are wealthy in the state and to say to them, look, this is a place where you have raised your kids, you've made millions, even billions of dollars with companies within this state. This is a state you've lived in perhaps for decades, and now you're going to tell us that giving back to this state is just too much of a burden on you and you're going to move to Florida. I mean, a big part of me just says, go to Florida. But at the same time, I get, the importance of this issue but this idea that somehow it is simply off limits. And so what we need to do is we need to chase after behaviors and sins that people engage in as a way of generating what really is kind of chump change in some ways in order to make it palatable to people who are wealthy in the state and say, okay, now you're going to stay. I just think that's crazy and it's gutless lawmaking.
Emily, what does that conversation at the Capitol right now sound like? The progressive conversation that we've been hearing for such a long time that says we should go where the money is, and the money's in Fairfield County, and it's these rich guys who have hedge funds.
Well, in their press conference, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the Progressive Caucus made it really clear that they want to see some sort of alteration to the income tax be part of the tax conversation as the budget is crafted. And I think it's going to be hard to make them swallow all of these sales tax increases without some sort of adjustment to the income tax. We'll see how those conversations go going forward. But if they hold a hard line on this, the Progressive Caucus is now about half of the House Democratic Caucus. So they are an element to be negotiated with, and I don't think you can ignore their point of view at the Capitol anymore.
A quick thought, Dan?
You cannot touch the income tax. Sorry. Get real.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to break with that very authoritative ending. We're going to break here, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about good economic news. Danny Harr might have some for us. He's from Hearst, Connecticut Media. Emily Munson is also here. She's state capital reporter for Hearst. And Bilal Sakou, associate professor of political science at the University of Hartford. Go Hawks. I'm John Dankosky, and this is The Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. Join our conversation at WNPR.org/The Wheelhouse. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. Starting at 10 o'clock today at WNPR.org, you can find Michael Cohen's testimony, and that's something you'll be able to watch throughout the course of the day. We'll also have some live coverage from NPR starting at around 11 o'clock, and you'll be able to hear some of that on WNPR as well. So follow throughout the day, please. We're joined today by Bilal Sakou. He's associate professor of political science at the University of Hartford. Also proudly serves on the board of the Connecticut Mirror. Dan Harr, editor and columnist at Hearst, Connecticut Media. Emily Munson is the state capital reporter for Hearst. We've got a lot more to get through, but Dan, I just want to quickly go to you because we always talk about bad economic news in Connecticut. We talk about our gigantic budget deficit, people leaving the state because it's such a high-tax place and it's so difficult to live here. Don't we have actually good economic news right now?
We do. Yesterday was a piece of good news. We had 3.3% annualized growth, meaning that in the third quarter of last year, the summer, July, August, September, the Connecticut economy grew at a rate of 3.3% a year. which was more or less on target with the U.S. average of 3.4. And because of the oddity of mathematics, that puts us in the top 21, number 21 among states for that quarter. Much more important than that is that this piece of economic news is part of a broader look at 2018, which shows improvement through the year and overall a good year in comparison, not in comparison to Texas, but in comparison to where we have been. We had a disastrous 2 years of 16 and 17 where the economy actually shrank and we had no job growth. 2018, we saw what looks like it's going to shake out at between 16 and 18,000 jobs. We're going to get a final report on that next week. But I had a lot of Twitter back and forth over bad news, good news. There is a whole community of people in this state who thrive on bad news, and they want to bash Connecticut. And I'm not one of these like Pollyanna, everything is great guys. I'm the one who wrote we're in a recession at the start of the January 1st, 2018. That said, we had a good year in 2018.
I will just quickly ask you about this. Yes, there's some people who pride themselves on putting out bad news about Connecticut. It's like, I don't know, like a third of the state. There's a million some people.
It's a big number.
Spend all their time talking about how bad a place Connecticut is. Putting on your amateur economist, longtime business columnist hat, Danny, is there a sense that Connecticut is coming out of this in such a way that as the next recession inevitably comes, and we've talked about this before, already seeing signs of a next national recession on the horizon, is Connecticut better positioned to stave off some of the bad effects than we have been in the past?
Had that conversation yesterday with the economist Don Kleppersmith. He thinks we are worse off because we have less wiggle room because of our fiscal crisis. Other economists, I believe Fred Carstensen at UConn, believes that we're better off because we have fallen less far. I'm not 100% sure that's what he thinks, but I think he told me that. And other Moody's, for example, they believe that we are better off because our housing prices have not gone up at all, and therefore they have less far to fall.
Interesting. Okay, well, we'll check back with you and
so
see.
That's a great. That's the next great debate. Is what happens to Connecticut when the inevitable recession happens next year.
Let's quickly turn to one of Governor Lamont's picks to help run the state and hopefully help boost our economy a little bit. David Lamont is from Greenwich. He's offered to take his job without pay. He's someone that is well known to many people who followed what happened back in 2008 when the economy collapsed. He cleared a key legislative committee on Tuesday by an 8-0 vote, but not without tough questions about his time as a Goldman Sachs executive, specifically his involvement in so-called collateralized debt obligations. Many people blame these risky mortgage-backed investments for contributing to the financial meltdown. Here's Lamont testifying at the Executive and Legislative Nominations Committee hearing on Tuesday.
I have always prided myself in being honest, transparent, and forthright with clients and colleagues, and I hope you'll find those qualities in me as well. Any suggestion that I knew a product was going to be worthless and subsequently sold it to a client is completely and wholly untrue.
We heard, Emily, from Marty Looney, who heads up the Senate, that he has some concerns about this. Our colleague, of course, Colin McEnroe, both our colleague here at WNPR and also writes a column at Hearst, Connecticut Media Now, raised quite some concerns about this. Are any Democrats concerned about this appointment in your mind?
Yeah, there are several Democrats who are very concerned about this. As you mentioned, Marty Looney put some really tough questions to Lamont yesterday, and so did State Rep Michael D'Agostino during the hearing. And I know that other Democrats as well, particularly in the House, have concerns. I'm not sure if it's enough to sink the nomination, but Democrats are not in favor. I think they find it unappealing to put someone who had such a role in facilitating the mortgage crisis of 2008, or at least was at the company that participated in this, to put that person in charge of Connecticut's economic path going forward.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Bilal, do you share some of their concerns?
Absolutely, and I would have been surprised if there were folks in the caucus who wasn't concerned about this appointment. I think Emily is right that ultimately it will go through. But I think at the same time, I just find it impossible to believe that he was unknowledgeable of what was going on. In this situation, the company was certainly making, its bets on making money off of something disastrous happening on the other end. And that just did not occur as a mystery, and there was a lot of communication between both sides of the organization that was working, this system in order to maximize their profits. And I mean, and to say he, would not willingly have participated in it if that was what the business was doing and he was a part of it, I don't think he escapes responsibility for what went down.
Is he a good choice to head up the DECD, Dan?
I think he's a great choice because he knows about how this stuff works. I think
what stuff? I mean, are we going to start, as a state, are we going to start doing collateralized debt obligations?
We're moving more toward a technocracy when it comes to economics and economic development.
Gotcha.
It's less about ideology and it's less about big picture deals and more about details within a deal. This guy is... At age 28, he was the head of structured finance at Goldman Sachs, for crying out loud. What were you doing at age 28? Okay, I mean, that's.
I was working here.
To say that this guy is not. He's very knowledgeable about how deals work on a very technical level, and he's a big picture guy. So he's a good choice. As for the questions that were put to him, I could not agree less that they were difficult questions. They were softball questions, because when you say to somebody, "You were in the room when this crookery happened, and this is the big picture of the crookery, and were you a part of that?" That's an easy question. Anybody can answer that. A third grader can answer that. Well, I don't know. But the hard questions were, look, this stuff has been gone over in at least 3 books, including The Big Short, right? And the basic mechanics, which Colin laid out very nicely in a column on the week that he was nominated, where they packaged up a bunch of mortgages into things called CDOs, collateral debt obligations, and that becomes an object that you sell. They sold it to clients as good stuff, and then they bet against it knowing it was going to go down. This isn't complicated, and it's not hard for them to answer because, of course, he didn't know it was going to lose its value. The question is, in a specific deal, Abacus, on May 14th, what did you do? There's the only hard questions are questions that get to an exact specific day and we don't have subpoena power here in this legislature to get to that level of detail. This has been gone over. The guy is a good, smart guy, and it's really good that he's joining the administration. Yes, he was a part of all that stuff.
Let me ask you about another good, smart person, a friend of Ned Lamont, someone who just took a big job. Indra Nooyi joined the Amazon board on Monday, former PepsiCo chair, and someone who's been sort of helping Ned Lamont through this transition here. What does this do for Connecticut?
The way I understand it, board members of big companies are not in the business of lobbying for their side interests. So it's not like she's going to go waving a flag saying, hey, now that I'm on the board, come to Connecticut. But as I said in the column, if anybody should have any questions about Connecticut and Amazon, she'll be able to answer them, and it can only help. I don't think this is going to be like an inside job type, come to Connecticut, but it can help. If the Stamford plan, which is not bring the headquarters to Stamford instead of Long Island City, but, hey, let's get 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 jobs in Stamford as an outlet to get some of those New York talent pool people in here. She could really help with that.
Do you see it as a realistic plan? I mean,
yes.
You do.
Yes, not the big nut,
not the thing that was going to be in Queens, but some version of that as they retreat from New York.
Stamford is a good option if you don't want to be in New York and you want New Yorkers.
I want to turn to another story that's sort of fascinating here. It involves another Greenwich resident. Should State Senator Alex Bergstein be able to pay for additional legislative aid out of her own pocket? The first Democratic state senator from Greenwich in 90 years told the Hartford Courant, "My team and my operations is my business," but she's since asked the state ethics officials for a formal opinion in the matter. A concern that was argued by the Courant in a subsequent editorial is that Bergstein's aide does not have a state email address, so there's no way to FOI records to find out what she's working on. So this is unusual, Emily. This is someone hiring an extra aide sort of outside the normal legislative channels.
It is very unusual. I think it shows that Bergstein is quite aggressive and has a large agenda that she wants to accomplish. But not many legislators take the step of trying to pay for an aide out of their own pocket. I guess we'll see what the Office of State Ethics says about this going forward.
Our general rule on the Office of State Ethics is that no matter what you've done, they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. right? I mean, this is generally what happens. We don't get a whole lot of other rulings, but I mean, does it raise other concerns up at the Capitol, or people other than maybe some ethics watchdogs like my friend Bilal, who I'll talk in a minute? Are other people concerned about this?
I think there are a few people who are concerned about this, but not enough to really make it a huge issue.
Interesting. Bilal, I mean, should we be concerned about this trend?
We should absolutely be concerned. And obviously, you're referring to another hat that I wear, which is the chair of the board for Common Cause in Connecticut and also a member of the National Governing Board. And, this issue, when it was first brought to my attention, really bothered me. And I think Emily's sort of comment about others being able to hire someone. The reality is most legislators up there couldn't do what she has done, which is to hire someone on her staff who has no state email, who really, and it really, for me, it raises a fundamental question. Who exactly does she work for? Does she work for the legislature or does she work for the state of Connecticut? And that's not altogether clear. Can she take actions, for example, that would be exempt from public scrutiny because technically she's not a state employee? Can she sit in and be involved in decisions that are being made up there? And so it raises a lot of questions. I've heard that she's paying for her salary, but it's not altogether clear that that is the case. I mean, what's the proof of that?
I will say, though, it's pretty clear, though, lines get blurred around election time. And because election time happens every 2 years, it's always election time, right? There are constantly people getting paid by the state who are volunteering time on the campaign. So I don't know, Bilal, those... Not that I'm saying I'm in any way supporting this. It's just it feels as though it's already been set up in a way so that there's constantly people coming through a legislative office who are sort of part of doing the work of the campaign and also doing the work of the state. I don't see how this is necessarily any different than that.
Right. Well, one difference is that she's not a state employee. She is someone who has been hired by someone who has the capacity to be able to pay for an additional staffer. Why not 2? Why not 3? Why not 4 additional staffers? I mean, is that really the path we want to go down as a state? These are state workers. They work for us, the public, and I've got real questions about just who exactly is she accountable to? Is she accountable to the lawmaker, or is she accountable to the voters of Connecticut who put the lawmaker in office? That's not clear, and to have that line blurred, I think, is problematic. And we just, if what we need is some language that really says, okay, here are what the boundaries are. But I think this is just not the appropriate way of doing things.
I fault Marty Looney, the Senate president. It's his job to pull her aside and say, knock it off. This is going to pass ethics. Saying that I'm seeking an ethics ruling is really a red herring. The ethics laws in Connecticut have to do with gaining a financial advantage. Obviously, neither she nor anyone close to her is gaining a financial advantage. She needs to just knock it off. She's a freshman senator. The Senate president needs to pull her aside and saying, come on, stop this. This is silly.
I tell you what, I want to take a break now because I want to get back to the conversation that we were having earlier with Emily Munson, the state capitol reporter for Hearst Connecticut Media. She's been spending a lot of time talking with people about these casino bills, and I think there's a lot more to talk about on that issue. We also want to come back with some of our feats of strength or maybe some grievances we have, some things over the course of the week that we can let our listeners know about. As I said, Emily Munson's here from Hearst Connecticut Media, as is Danny Haar from Hearst. Bilal Sakou is here from the University of Hartford. He has several other hats as well. Go Hawks. I'm John Dankosky. This is The Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. You can always find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. We are with Bilal Sakou today. He's an associate professor of political science at the University of Hartford. Danny Haar, who writes columns. He's an editor at Hearst Connecticut Media. And also Emily Munson, state capitol reporter for Hearst Connecticut Media. We were talking earlier, Emily, about what's happening at the state capitol. Specifically, earlier we were talking about sports betting and casinos, but there's an awful lot more being debated up there right now because there's still this attempt to expand casino gambling. There's questions about whether or not there's going to be a casino north of Hartford, whether or not a casino in Bridgeport or someplace else is going to happen. What's the latest from the Capitol on casinos?
So yesterday was a big day for gambling at the state capitol. As I mentioned earlier, there was a hearing that lasted all day and into the night on 4 bills all around gambling. There was the sports betting element that we mentioned before, but there was also two bills on expanding casinos in Connecticut. The first bill is about letting the casino in East Windsor, which is a joint partnership of the two tribes. It's being called Tribal Winds Casino, letting that project advance without federal approval. This federal approval has been stalled, and now there is a criminal investigation down in D.C. into the behavior of Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke and his involvement in possibly, we don't know yet, possibly delaying this project. So there was a spotlight on that issue during the hearing yesterday. This is a bill that's being championed by Senator Kathy Austin of Sprague, who has the tribes in her district. So she is a strong champion of tribal casinos. And then the opposing interest is the issue of a commercial casino in Connecticut. Right now, there are no commercial casinos in Connecticut, but MGM has lobbied for years to bring one to the state, and they're particularly interested in siting a casino in Bridgeport. So, of course, this has gained big support among the Bridgeport delegation that wants to bring jobs to their area. And it also has gained the support of other urban delegations like New Haven.
And I'll just quickly say, MGM's been trying to do this for years, and they haven't really had an opening because, as we'd earlier said, there's this gaming compact with the tribes. Tribal gaming on tribal land is the thing that Connecticut supports. Therefore, we're not going to have any more commercial casinos. The only possible way that a window could be opened up in many people's legal minds for MGM to be able to build a casino in Springfield, let's say if the state kind of blew up the whole idea of the compact and got the two tribes in cahoots together to build a third casino off of tribal land in order to compete with MGM. It's almost as though the state has opened up the only door possible for another casino that wouldn't be on tribal land run by a group like MGM.
Right. Well, they say that this is not about MGM, that they want to do. They want to do an open bidding process where any prospective developer could come and submit their plan, and they want to know the value of their commercial casino license, they say. However, there is obviously a clear interest on behalf of MGM in this area. And yeah, what you're getting at is the heart of the matter is, would a commercial casino bring enough revenue to the state directly and also to the towns in that area to make it economically worthwhile to blow up this contract with the tribes, in which the tribes send a quarter of their slot revenue every year to the state? That's a big deal. It's weighing heavily on lawmakers' minds, and there's not a consensus on what to do. Democrats are very divided on this issue, and Republicans too. It's really not a partisan issue. People have strong feelings about whether Connecticut should be expanding gambling, period, and how.
The law?
Yeah, I mean, my general reaction to it is I just think it's a bad idea, this idea of expanding gambling. I'm starting to wonder whether, the Northeast has become saturated with gambling, and we're looking for new opportunities to do it to raise revenue at the risk of increasing, addiction to gambling. Because the only way I think these casinos can really work is they need to grow the number of people who are gambling, or the people who are gambling, make them gamble even more. And both of those things really bother me.
Tell that to the 3,000 people in East Bridgeport who are looking for jobs.
Yeah.
The bottom line is it's about jobs and it's about economic development, and this is the society we have. We don't have the society you and I want. We have this society, and the need to expand gambling because that's what people are buying. I don't like it any more than you do. I wish they were buying newspapers instead of chips at a casino,
sort
but
of
they're
what
not.
people are buying. Yeah. People were buying a little bit more of it a little longer ago when there weren't so many options for gambling. And Danny, if we have legalized sports betting, and of all the people up there talking about Bobby Valentine, who owns a couple of these off-track betting places, if you can do sports betting someplace else, and there's a lot of other places for people, maybe you're not going to have 3,000 jobs at a Bridgeport casino. You'll have a tiny little casino that's going to struggle like a lot of other, like Highlight used to.
Well, you just raised another point, which is it's an argument both for it and against it. The fact that all surrounding states are doing this. This is part of the argument for marijuana legalization. The fact that Massachusetts has it, effectively we have it. Sports betting is here, right? You can't not have sports betting. It's, what is it, 6 billion, 60 billion? I don't even understand the number, right? But it's a big number, and you might as well cash in on it because people hear Bobby Valentine yesterday according to one of the stories, it was your story, that he drove down. He testified that people were driving down to New Jersey to place a bet and then coming back to Connecticut just during a game. And you can't have that. And I just want to say that yesterday I gave up a chance to see Bobby Valentine because I was down in Stamford, of all ironies, a great hero, and I can't believe I missed it.
Okay, well, let's turn, as we finish out the program, to a few thoughts people have about the week's news or some things that are on your mind. We ask you for either a feat of strength, Danny, or perhaps a grievance of some sort. What do you want to go with today?
My feat of strength today is that we in Connecticut in 19 are living in a golden age. I said food last time, and we're in a golden age of ideas. There are venues for people to air and hear great big picture ideas. Yesterday, or Monday rather, there were 125 people at UConn listening to a lecture and a discussion about specific ways to use marijuana to cure specific diseases and syndromes, right? And I'm not making a value judgment about the subject matter, just that there's all these venues. Samantha Power, the former UN ambassador, is coming to Connecticut Forum next week. There's just all these ideas floating around, and there are ways for us to both participate and listen.
A lot of ideas. That's a good thing. I like that. So we've got good economic news, and we've got good news on the ideas front. Maybe Connecticut's not such a bad place after all, Danny.
If I say that, I'm going to get tweets from people who say that this is a drain. A drain is circling or something like that.
I know. This is what we hear all the time. Emily, how about you? What's on your mind this week?
Yeah, I appreciate you being very positive, Dan, because I'm going to be a little bit more negative.
Oh, boy.
I'm disappointed in the news that some students have been suspended in Connecticut for posting videos wearing blackface, and obviously this has been in the news a lot recently, and it's disappointing to see it happening here in our state. Yeah,
it is. It is happening in our state. It's happening sort of all over the country, and it's something that we've talked about on the program before, Bilal. This is something that as we start talking about it more and more, we start seeing more and more of it around the country, don't we?
Yeah, I think if we open up the yearbooks across the country, going back decades, we'd be pretty shocked by some of the things we'd see in those yearbooks. That's both at the collegiate level, high school level. I think the issue of race is something that is a really deeply rooted problem in our society, and the best thing we can do is to really bring these things to the surface and try to tackle them, which is really in part about what I want to sort of talk about, sort of feat of strength was, the athlete students down at Ole Miss who decided to take a knee at a basketball game, members of the basketball team, in protest to a march, a pro-Confederacy march that went on there. And sort of related to that is a grievance, which is the idea that there are still people in our country who complain about people taking a knee at what is essentially a game, and also complain about students who decide not to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, but at the same time will make the argument that they have a right to not vote because as an American citizen, that is one of their rights. And so on the one hand, you would tell people that they have to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and have to stand for the national anthem, but you have a right to not vote, because I think these are all rights that we have as citizens, which is to kneel and also to not stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, just as we have a right to perhaps not vote, but I think we should vote because that is a duty that we have as American citizens.
I just want to pull this through a little bit more with you, Bilal, though. It's interesting. I've been following that story as well, that we sort of went through a period of maybe the last year or so in which this question of kneeling for the national anthem kind of sort of went away. It was a hot button issue.
Right.
Colin Kaepernick was the face of it, and it was happening at high schools. It was happening at colleges. Donald Trump was getting involved in it, and we haven't really seen that again. And a lot of that had to do with police violence. It had to do with really serious racial injustice. This seems to be focused on the issue of this hasn't gotten solved in this last couple of years, right? Nothing substantively has changed, and these students are making a very strong comment about that.
I absolutely agree, and I'm really proud of them. And if I knew them personally, I would tell them that I'm proud of them, that this has been an issue that has not gone away from them. I think what's really important about what happened with Kaepernick's protest and what sort of subsequently followed is that it really penetrated our thinking about these kinds of issues. And so I think across the country, more and more people are out in communities who are really taking a closer look at these kinds of problems in their communities and joining groups like Black Lives Matter and other local organizations to really tackle these problems. And so I think Kaepernick has helped to launch that kind of response.
A very quick feat of strength for me. If anybody's been following Twitter of Connecticut politics the last week, they may have seen a really interesting picture from 1974. Mark Davis, the dean of the Capitol Press Corps, somebody who's always there asking the first question. You know, you see him, he's sort of very dapper with his white hair now. Yes, he's pictured standing next to Freddie Mercury, and Mark's the one wearing the kind of crazy outfit with sunglasses with a mustache. You got to check it out. It's on Twitter. So a feat of strength of Mark Davis, who was cool back in 1974. Thanks to Emily and thanks to Bilal. Thanks to Danny for being here. Thanks to Scott Breedy and everyone who produces The Wheelhouse for us here on WNPR.